I had the pleasure of being here today, so I got to sort of ambiently think about things over the course of the day. And so I put some stuff on my Tumblr blog, and I figured I'd share that while I'm here. So a couple things just that caught my attention in the last couple hours, the last day, that I think is relevant to the topic here. One is, the same week or the same month that, for example, Bloomberg bought Business Week for under $5 million. Gowalla, how many people know of Gowalla? Use it. It's sort of a pretty cousin to Foursquare. It got valued at like $20 or $30 million, and we won't press read on exactly what the terms were, but I'm sure he knows. But again, it shows that there's just a rapid erosion of attention from traditional media publishers to new media publishers, location-based services, etc. The other thing that I've kind of came to me listening to Judith's piece earlier was this quote that I came up with, which is, it's really, the internet's not about pages, it's about people. And so as a corollary to this and counter to, the medium is the message, I'd say the medium's not the message, the medium is the member. It's really all about identity, and identity is becoming the medium for social media, not the content or the messages within it. I studied critical theory and comp lit at Columbia, so this is kind of like me coming back out of the closet in this environment. And there's a great quote from Walter Benjamin that was in a recent kind of collection, and I think it's in when he's talking about radio. And it was quoted from the German newspaper. It says, the radio listener is almost always a solitary individual. And even if you're and Benjamin was about to apparently to speak to a radio audience for the first time. I think some of you probably know he was curating a symphony series that they were broadcasting on the radio. And so this is what he was told in terms of how to talk to the audience. He was told, the radio listener is always a solitary individual, and even if you were to reach a few thousand of them, you're always only reaching thousands of solitary individuals. So you need to behave as if you were speaking to an individual or to many individuals, but not to a large gathering of people. So we go 75 years later. What I love is, the genius of Zuckerberg and Facebook is they really get that, right? Facebook is not social media because it's one big conversation reaching 350 million people. It's billions, if not trillions, of little conversations happening between two people or three people, which I think is what makes it so powerful. So that is, in a nutshell, introduction to me, and hopefully I'm looking forward to the conversation now.
Thank you.
Sure. Seth obviously doesn't believe in PowerPoints either, and neither do I. I tend to think they put audiences to sleep. I thought the interesting remarks to start a dialogue, since we're talking about forum, this should simply be interactive, would be actually go to some of the theory that started my investing and started LinkedIn at a very high level, and then, as it were, pass the mic. So in 2002, when we had sold PayPal to eBay, I was looking around, and most of the venture capitalists in Silicon Valley believed the internet was dead. It was owned by Google, Yahoo, Amazon, eBay, etc. And what I think that they had missed, because frequently one of the things I love about Silicon Valley is it's mad after the future. Matter of fact, I started hearing about Web 3.0 a couple of years ago. I don't think we're there yet. But one of the things they've done is they said, okay, well, the internet's done. And actually, in fact, it was predicting it too early, because what the cycle that we're in is now that everyone is with their real identities and their real relationships online, what kinds of applications and what kinds of results come about as a function of that. And in the very earliest days with some blogging and everything else, it was like there was a heavy social media influence in this, and social media is, of course, a great thing. I've invested in a bunch of it. But it's also, it's a question of kind of how do people begin to change the navigational path of their, quote-unquote, real lives based upon their actual identity and relationship participations in these online media. And, obviously that started happening with a variety of, social networks and other kinds of things online, and obviously that's going to be extended to mobile in interesting ways in the next few years, and deepening. And so I decided that was actually a transition we're about to have, and made a lot of internet bets. Basically, other than a few clean tech bets, that's all I invested in. Now, how that led to LinkedIn is that my reasoning was that people would first see the social and entertaining and kind of lightweight, almost kind of like game-like connections with each other. Everything from photo sharing, which was, an investment in Flickr, part of the investment in Facebook, to, kind of like to some degree status update play and that kind of stuff is to some degree frequently almost game-like in its mechanics. And I went, all right, so that's the part that's going to take off soonest. It's going to have broad range. But actually, I think, our lives are composed of kind of multiple spheres. And, one of the spheres is an economic sphere. And that there's a confluence of how the change in people's work lives and career management and what actually constitutes an economic life is changing. And it actually has a deep parallel to what's going on the internet. Because on the work side, basically every individual no longer is kind of what you might think of as a medieval model of kind of working in one corporation for 30 or 40 years. And that's even true in Japan, where your average 30-year-old has had 4 jobs at this point, but is instead essentially a small business where they maintain the personal brand. Some of that will manage for, of course, social media in terms of technical stuff, but also their competitive position, assets like business intelligence or resources they can call upon in order to solve tasks. And you have the world becoming flat in terms of kind of more global competition. And now, in terms of maintaining themselves as a competitive business, because competition is always, competitive position is one of the questions you always ask in business. They have to do that themselves. There's not like management training seminars in a variety of companies, because companies usually expect you to last now 2 to 4 years. And there's a few holdovers, but not many. And the trend is much more to what has been described as a free agent nation. Now, the analog to what's going on online with all these transformations is quite easy. So, for example, one of the things that's interesting when you have everybody having a real identity voice online is, well, everyone has the question of how do you manage your own personal brand management becomes a relevant question, whether theoretically or practically. The question of how to use these tools to bind yourself together and collaborate and coordinate and build relationships. And so for the last kind of comment about this, actually I'll make 2 last comments. One is, one of the things that I've always found overly simplistic about the general theory of capitalism is that business and trade is based on future expectations. And that future expectations is not mechanistic like a contract. It actually has a lot to do with what do you really expect to have happen when you engage in a business venture or transaction. And people are not, one of the reasons why, for example, a lot of employment happens through referral and through other people is that people are not mechanistic components, they're more organic components. And so how those ecologies come together is much more of an ecology than a kind of a factory or a mechanical system. And so, I think one should always be a little cautious about prognosticating the future, because usually the future is sooner and stranger than you think. But I think that actually we're not just in a social media and internet revolution, but there's also a changing revolution about how all of our economic lives live and how they weave together.
Nobody clapped after your introduction. I'm sorry about that. Now they won't clap after mine either. Just for that. I just had
Are you a Foucaultian or a Marxian?
I like to say Twitter is unintentionally Marxist right now. with the hopes of being capitalists. So we had our
discipline, I promise you.
yeah, that's going to be the headline in some paper tomorrow. So
Maybe
I
on
was thinking,
NPR.
yeah,
Twitter declares Marxist intention.
that's right. That's right.
You heard it here.
Calling it in.
Let's see. So I was thinking about the sort of the theme of the panel here last night. We had our holiday party last night, and we were reflecting on 2009. And one of the topics that came up while we were reflecting on Twitter in 2009 was the Iran elections. And to me, that was sort of prototypical or symptomatic of what the future of the forum is going to look like. It's going to be radically open, so it will be hard to suppress. It will be more about the content than about standards, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. And it will be less about a few media outlets or authority figures deciding what the discussion will be about, and more about bottom-up authority, right? So there will be this bottom-up authority whereby the crowd decides what is going to be important and what's going to be discussed. And I think that the third facet of this that's fascinating is that it will be less anonymous than it sometimes is now, especially online. So, for example, if you look at comments on YouTube video streams, they're generally completely moronic. And that's one of the reasons they're completely moronic is because the user IDs are, Joe123, and Joe123 can say, first comment, and then the second comment is you're an idiot, and third comment is I hate this video, and it's just this idiotic conversation. And one of the interesting things about Twitter is that it's a lot less anonymous, right? Even if there's a Reid Hoffman on Twitter and a second Reid Hoffman on Twitter that's using Reid Hoffman's picture, you can use some fairly simple techniques to start to figure out, well, who's really Reid Hoffman? Well, this one has got, X thousand followers, and he's following these people I know to be friends of Reid, and this other one's following 2 people and hasn't said anything interesting about LinkedIn, and so this one's probably fake and this one's probably real. So I think those 3 things taken together, the radically open, the bottom-up authority, and the less anonymous, will lead to all sorts of interesting repercussions and implications for the future of the forum. We were just talking about, last night you had dinner with Dana Boyd, and we're talking about a conference Dana Boyd spoke at. It was a Web 2.0 summit, where there was an open Twitter stream about what she was talking about on the screen behind her, right? So there's the content is flowing into the actual room that she's presenting to, and the presentation went a little bit sideways, and the content in the Twitter stream behind her got pretty dramatic, if you will. And I think that there's this interesting, that's one of the implications of you can't really suppress it. It's bottom-up authority, and it's less anonymous, right? It probably would have been even more dramatic and more insulting, if you will, if it had been more anonymous. So I think those are interesting attributes of the future of the forum that are worth thinking about.
That leads actually perfectly into what I was going to talk about. It's interesting. I've been thinking about pop culture and what's happening in pop culture, and just going back to when I was growing up, I could tell if somebody grew up around the time I did by what television shows they watched, because there were a few networks and there were certain shows, and you just knew. When the Beatles went on Ed Sullivan, I guess it was back in the late 60s, the first time they went on, more than 40% of the population saw them. And I don't think there is any more, I know there is no longer any show on television, or I can't think of any place really in the popular culture where you could get that large a percentage of the population to pay attention. American Idol, which is perhaps one of the most popular shows, I don't have the percentages, but I'm going to say that and figure the population was smaller back then. 73 million Americans watched the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. The highest numbers that I see for American Idol are 33 million viewers. So think about that. And the population's bigger now, and this is really popular. So I do see this thing happening also in music as well, right? Where people are able to get whatever they want, when they want it, where they want it. This is kind of the big media phrase that you hear right now. Get what you want, when you want it, where you want it. I've been listening to this as a reporter going on now for some time. People used to talk about the digital divide, meaning those who were online and those who were offline. I think that divide is well on its way to being over, and I'm just assuming it's going to be over. I think the divide that's increasingly existing is just that we are becoming more and more of very heterogeneous, finding the people whose culture we happen to share, whether it be anorexics or whether it be the people, young people who like Doctor Who. One of our producers, her daughter is a huge Doctor Who fan. She goes online, she finds other kids who like that, but there's no sense of this shared culture. This is also, as one of the last remaining mainstream media organizations, I'm watching around me what's going on, and newspapers just kind of falling, and you're seeing the rise of blogs and this, what struck me is you're talking about this kind of bottom-up authority, where people just start to talk and people listen, and there's no sort of top-up, there's no filter, there's no Ed Sullivan saying, check out the Beatles, I think they're really great. In some ways, this concerns me a bit. I don't know, I'm not anti-technology, but I do see these echo chambers starting to form. So if you go on, I think really the break started to happen before the internet with cable, where you got so many channels. And now you can go on, you can watch cable news, you can watch Rachel Maddow, or you can watch Fox, and you can find the people you agree with. And I think the same thing starts to happen in online communities as well. And it's something to think about, that is such a heterogeneous society that the United States is. Where are our common public forums? Where will they be in the future? And it's something that I've been thinking about lately.
Well, maybe we could actually ask panelists to start thinking more about that question, even though it was implicit in things that you already said. I mean, what about some of, say, skepticism about whether there is, thank you, what are common publics is one type of question, that you can't stop it, quality. Is there a role for something like rules or regulation in certain places, or what do we say back when people wonder about that? Is there a role for filters? Earlier in some of the panels this morning and this afternoon, some were saying that technology cultures need rules in order to function creatively and collaboratively. That there needs to be structures, and others were concerned about filters for information or access to wisdom, as Bert Dreyfus said earlier. So, what do people think about about some of the skeptical concerns about the erosion of public thinking and debate, and with these? What do you say back? I guess.
Well, one of my favorite expressions is things aren't like they used to be and never were. Now that sidesteps the real question, which is, well, how do you make it better, right? Because that's the real brunt of the question is, what should we be doing in order to have a good environment? And I think that generally speaking, it is better to have a distributed network of innovation. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't places for regulating marketplaces, or there's corner cases, but to, generally speaking, at scale, centralized planning is a disaster. And usually you should only do it when it kind of follows the Churchill line on democracy, which is, well, democracy is a terrible form of government, but it's up for all the others. Exactly. Right. So, when you have to, let's say roads and other kinds of things is an important thing. There's certain natural monopolies and utilities and whatnot which need to be regulated for obvious reasons. At least I think obvious reasons. There are probably people who would debate with me on that. Now, in terms of thinking about what kinds of things centralized institutions like regulatory bodies should do in order to help, I actually, the framework that I've been kind of playing with in my head is, what would be the web services that a government would offer, right? Like what would be the like if it was an API interface, what would it be in order to make it happen, as opposed to tons of people who think that the internet is made out of pipes, lecturing on. And that might be part of the identity question. Like, for example, what if you had a web services call for the driver's license database, other kinds of things. Like, what would then be possible then in terms of innovation on the network? Though that would be the flavor of my usual response to these kinds of questions.
Great. Seth, do you want to?
I think Reed's bringing up an important point. So if you think about a spectrum, we've got identity on one hand and then anonymity on the other. What's sort of mediating it or balancing it is data, right? So data is what is produced when I identify myself. I mean, obviously I produce data when I'm anonymous, but I produce a lot more data when I'm identified. And the minute I log into a Facebook or I log into a Twitter, or I log into LinkedIn, there's a phenomenal amount of community formation that's happening in real time. So that as I identify myself to one of these networks or to all these networks, that I exist as a male, I exist as a member of Marin, I exist as an American, I exist as an alumnus of Columbia, I exist as an entrepreneur. I mean, I start to participate in all these affinity groups, some of which are surfaced differently in different environments. So in LinkedIn, I factor into all sorts of professional topologies, and when I'm logged into Facebook, it's a whole different set of affinities and communities. Some of which are static, like where I went to school. Others of which are being produced in real time based on what I click on, what I surf, that's more aleatory. And so, as that is being produced by virtue of my identity, the flip side is, well, then how do I rescue some anonymity for myself? How do I shield myself from the public? How do I, get off the street and go into a more quiet environment? And I think as much as the government probably should give us access, like Reed's saying, to driver records and insurance protocols and all that, it would be nice if there was some body that granted us anonymity in a really secure way. I think that one of the greatest hoaxes right now, in business is LifeLock, right? And just sort of, and I get called at home by Bank of America yesterday saying, Bank of America calls you. I have a credit card with Bank of America. It's Friday night. I'm going to pick up the call, and inevitably, it's not about my frickin' account. It's about them wanting to upsell me identity theft insurance. And it's like, this is bogus. You're not actually. You're just taking my money because you're trying to make me afraid. And so, they're doing a great holiday promotion, I'm sure. So that's what I think we need for the evolution of a progressive public is some guarantee around anonymity.
But the actual
and deletion.
But deletion, I think, yes. The difficulty around anonymity is that everyone thinks about it as this kind of the radio thing, this one-on-one. And the anonymity issue is not what I'm doing. The anonymity issue is when Dick posts the picture of what we're doing here online, etc. It's the fact that I'm not the only person who produces information about myself.
Right.
And there are entire business sites that basically incent people to put in office phone numbers, mobile phone numbers, other kinds of things on people so that other salespeople can get it. And it's like, okay, that becomes a very difficult problem in the hypercube of scale.
Dick, did you want to say anything?
No, I was just going to say that I think the interesting one of the
Exactly.
see, look at that.
There you go.
Oh my God, who found that picture? That's awesome.
You You can't be anonymous.
No, you can't.
We know
you
you're
can't be anonymous.
brilliant.
That's right. So I think the interesting thing about the anonymity is when it can be, when there's identity that's, that can be protected again from the bottom up. I think it's hard to promote anonymity from the top down. Like, so Seth's notion of there should be a service that's, you know, responsible for protecting my identity. Well, then that service is, you know, the guy in charge. So what's a way that you can protect identity from the bottom up? I don't have a lot of good examples. One might be again, you're going back to the Iranian election, where lots of people on Twitter started saying my location is Iran, Baghdad, is Iran, and so that you know, or Tehran, so that the authorities in Iran looking for Iranians promoting, you know, fomenting revolution would be harder to find, and everyone changing their IDs and so forth to be I'm this person over in Iran when I'm really not, to try to sort of circle the wagons. That's an interesting way of protecting the lack of anonymity that the people sort of fomenting, you know, everyone meet in the square could have. I don't have a lot of good other ideas about how to go about it, but there probably are some.
And people keep saying that basically anonymity, privacy is just over. And on some level, it seems that it just is. I mean, how can you protect? Because indeed, somebody can take a picture of you, put it online, and that's that. And there isn't a whole heck of a lot that you can do about it at this point. Who are you going to sue? You know, back in the day when you just had newspapers and somebody put your picture there with something false that you said, you could sue the newspaper.
Right.
But there isn't anything like that. So unfortunately, I feel like you just have to accept that there's just going to be a lot less privacy than there ever was. And then find little realms where perhaps you can keep some privacy, you know, about your credit card number, about that, and get certain kinds of locks. But there's certain ways in which I just think the world is going to be less private than it was.
Well, let's having thought about anonymity, which was actually one of the open process working groups earlier. Let's flip to the opposite, which is because so many of these social media are really about the opposite, about exposure and about a lot. And as a result, a number of people have been turning to other kinds of phrases for thinking about the new economies brought on by social media technologies, and we've heard them throughout the day. Things like that we're into this is about symbolic production. That this is about an attention economy, a reputational economy. Seth, I think all of you have at some point used some of these phrases, the influence economy. I'm just thinking about how some of those ways of imagining, using the word economy, but also thinking about the circulation of image and representation and connections across the globe in these technologies. How do they inflect how you're thinking about your organizations, new organizations?
I mean, I'm just thinking about at this point how I increasingly use social media as a reporter.
Yeah.
And I'm really aware.
NPR, right.
Yeah, and I'm very, very aware of what I put up. I never put anything online. I mean, you know, it's very important to me to maintain some semblance of not taking sides on a lot of things. And so I never put anything up. I do think about actually managing my image. And I guess in that way I try and keep a realm of privacy.
Right.
And I think NPR has very, very explicit rules now about social media and how we can use it and what's against NPR policy and what is not.
So can you give an example about something that might be sort of
Well,
surprising?
in the same way,
or
it's
different?
like if, for example, you are on social media and you join a group that's on one side of the political spectrum in order to do research, we were told it's also best to join a group on the other side of the spectrum so that it doesn't appear as if you are being biased in some way. So we really are looking at it at NPR, I think, as a very public place, and that as reporters, when we go out, we represent the organization in all of these social media places, and therefore we have to maintain ourselves as reporters. These are public sphere.
I have an interesting piece of tactical advice, which I generated actually in thinking about one of my favorite books, although I think the author would be horrified at my corollary, which is Postman's public discourse in the age of the television. And basically, we live in a future where Huxley rather than Orwell is one. And there's just a massive amount of data which diminishes relevance, and trying to control data by its absence is a futile game. So the advice that I give people when they're trying to do brand management is don't try to redact what's on the internet. Try to put your signal forward and get that most forward. So, for example, when people say, well, I don't want, I'm being asked by reporters about something personal about myself, and I don't want to answer it. Well, the answer is to have something personal to say, and have that personal thing be the thing that you say each and every time. Right? So you choose what is the signal thing that you put forward. And I believe that's the strategy that we essentially all need to adopt. And, because of his, somewhat, kind of diminishment of the public discourse through the advancement of technology, I think Postman would find, heretical may not be the way that he would think of it, but yes. Right. But I actually think that's the tactical advice for how you navigate these spaces.
So I agree, which is, I had a, Buckmaster talked about Godwin's law, which was this morning, which is that inevitably with the rise of any new technology or communication system, you inevitably talk to it with Nazi metaphors. And there's a couple of examples of large internet.
Tweet that.
Yes, Godwin's law. So to make this real and give you an example of what Reed's talking about, the other night, Yahoo announced that it had adopted Facebook Connect as an identity system, and there's some pretty substantiated rumors that MySpace is about to do the same thing. And so I tweeted that, and we maintain very close relationships with Facebook, and I'm a big supporter of Facebook at socialmedia.com. But I said that, Yahoo was Poland and MySpace was France. And I was like, oh, fuck, why did I say that? I need to say that. So, and you can't, and because everything is, I was about to talk about Twitter and Google as America. But I didn't say that. And what happens when you perfectly manage your please don't tweet any of this. when you perfectly manage your social brand, and to Reed's point, when you kind of get it out there and you connect your Facebook to your Twitter to your Foursquare to your Tumblr to your WordPress, what happens is the minute you say something, it's really out there. It's not just out there in one place. So I couldn't delete that on Twitter or Facebook because it kind of cross-pollinated. So I had to think of quickly other pithy things to say to push it into the channel. So hopefully it would go down the stream and people wouldn't read it. Right?
This is like the Iran election, but you're doing it to yourself.
Right. So that's a form of anonymity through digital noise. I don't know.
But also, I like the down the screen quality. That there's something when we're talking about self-presentation on the internet, and we think about performance and we use them for performance metaphors. We're thinking about this. That there's something about getting more verbiage out if the mechanism for delivering it is on a screen, getting it down the screen so that it's before anybody has a chance to read it, there's something else up. Was that part of the strategy?
That is absolutely part of the strategy. I mean, the way that I've had a number of friends who are like, oh, I hate this link about me that's on the third link of Google. I'm like, generate more links.
Yeah.
Right. That's the only strategy.
Say something about the data, the influence economy or the economy of attention versus the data economy. There's this. At least I see these pitches out there for companies that are, what we're going to do is there are all these influencers on Twitter, so what we're going to do is have them advertise our product, and that'll be great because they have X million followers and now they're promoting, XYZ widgets, so XYZ widgets get in front of all these people, and it seems kind of like a stupid juvenile notion of the future of the attention economy or the influence economy. And but there are other really fascinating ways to take advantage of the data economy, and those are things like Umair Haq from the other side of the country talks about, or the other side of the world, I guess he lives in London now, talks about Nike Plus as this amazing innovation, right? Because they've taken this total commodity item, the shoe, which is just, they've got this marketing machine behind them, and because Michael Jordan wears the shoe, now you should wear the shoe. And then because of Tiger Woods, here's $50 million for Tiger Woods to wear the hat. And they've made it now about the data, which is we're going to make you a better runner. And you're just going to put this little thing in your shoe, and it's going to come back and you're going to upload it, and we're going to compare it to other runners and start to tell you things like, hey, this is your best 5K yet, and you start to slow down at the 3K mark. And now we're going to add, and now they start to realize when people slow down, since this thing is integrated with the iPod, they've added a boost button to it. So when you slow down on your run and you press the boost button, your favorite song, the song you play the most on your iPod kicks in, and they get all this data. And then what they start to do with that is, now bring your shoes back to us now that we know how you run, and we're going to refurb them and get them back to you as better, newer shoes. Right? So it becomes more about using the data to make you better. And they've essentially eliminated their competition at that point, right? Because they're using the data to make you better. And if you think about the broader implications for that, it starts to become really expensive for companies like Nike to ship the shoes back over to the sweatshops overseas, so they have to set up local refurb shops that do the manufacturing, and that's better for everybody, and So there are innovative ways to think about the data economy that are more than just, you have a lot of, you're a big influencer, so here's a brand to promote.
Right. Well, actually, that also might lead us to another type of question that has come up a couple times today, and something. What do you have to say about advertising? About what the role of advertising is in each of your spaces, each of the places that you. I mean, obviously, it's a little different for NPR, but about how.
Well, there is an answer. It's just a different answer.
Yes, it's just a different answer. And but so much depends, at least used to depend on advertising in certain kinds of ways. You've just given an example of a different way to reimagine what advertising is. Do people have other things that they want to say about changing this? And I know you've also been asked a lot recently about Twitter and advertising.
I
Do
hear
you want to
they're
say more
great.
here?
They're going to be awesome.
Sorry.
I think advertising needs to be reinvented. It's this notion of here's a thing for you that I'm going to try to get in front of you, despite the fact that you've provided no information that you want to see this, or maybe a service can see information that says, based on the data on this page, or based upon all the other sites we know you go to, we think you should see this. I think that's just a kind of a stupid way to think about advertising, and it needs to be rethought, and it needs to be more about these. As I said before, if the future of the forum is that it's radically open and the authorities bottom up, then an ad needs to be about a conversation between a person and a service, and it should be initiated by the person. So I think there are lots of interesting implications about that. Again, if you had said, it sounds like this crazy thing, and well, who's ever going to do that? But again, if you had said 5 years ago, there's going to be this radical innovation around a data economy, and I think Nike shoes are going to be where it starts, people would have said you were insane, but they turn out to be one of the first ones to do it. So there are ways to do it, and I think we'll see those in the near future.
I think that the question is, advertising has generally built up in a model where you had a limited number of channels that had quasi-monopolistic distribution. And so the model that people normally ascribe to advertising is what I think, and I think other people describe it this way too, is interruptive advertising. And interruptive advertising is a terrible product, right? Because it's here, I've lured you in with this thing, now let me try to get this other thing in front of you, right? And I think at the high line, whether it's conversation or other things, I actually think the advertising product needs to be reinvented. Because when you don't have a kind of quasi-monopolistic distribution channel by which it's difficult to get around, where you can essentially force interruptive advertising, the challenge ends up becoming it's very easy to go do other things. I mean, think about the reason why websites do not persist very long in saying you have to look at this ad before you come into our website. And the answer is because the traffic does this, right? And that's the perfect example of why that doesn't work. And so,
and the skip this ad text is so small.
And they all abandon it because it's a way of kind of advertising themselves into the grave. And so that's I think what it is. But the optimistic side of it is I think that what it is it's a huge open space for interesting innovation to create new kinds of products.
I mean, I was going to say, because I've done some reporting on some of this, and I do think that the advertising agencies are trying to figure this out. One of the the problems that I see keep coming up with some of this are the sort of ethical problems that I think the FCC is starting to look into. For example, recently they made this rule that bloggers have to reveal if they're being paid to write about a topic. I'm not,
right,
you know, this came up, and I think that there is some concern about things too, like product placement. If you put it in the show, there's some questions. People start to feel bothered by this. On Facebook, I think, you know, with advertising there, one of the struggles, it seems to me, is to hear people are talking about their personal stuff, and then there you are with this ad. And so I think there's a real struggle right now, and Google has been, of course, in the best position because they know exactly what you're looking for, and they can give you an ad that's kind of relevant. You know, on NPR, you know, we don't really officially have ads, we have underwriting. And, you know, I suppose to some degree we were set up better for the current economy because our business model has always been begging. You know, we give you the product. Now, please, will you support us? So, you know, and if you like the product, you know, so that's always been our model, but it's something I think other people in the media are kind of thinking about at this moment. You know. But I do think there are ethical issues that I don't know that anybody really knows how to get around, and also that issue of when it starts to feel sleazy and you start to turn people off.
Right, right. Exactly.
I'm going to jump in here because this is my thing.
Yeah.
And you can bring up socialmedia.com while you're at it. So I'm the co-chair of the Internet Advertising Bureau's social media committee. So I'm like deeply dealing with a lot of these issues around paid endorsements, in-stream advertising, word-of-mouth advertising, sponsored blogs, etc. So it's a little bit of a roundabout way, but a couple years ago, Dick and I and some others helped start an organization called Attention Trust. And the idea, and very influenced by Michael Goldhaber of Berkeley, who's really just a phenomenal theorist about attention and influence and information. And so we basically, the thesis was that, you know, all this data is out there being collected about people, clickstream data in particular, what you search for, where you go, and it's being, you know, stolen from people and being commercially appropriated by publishers and media companies who are taking this clickstream data and sort of selling it to marketers without you knowing. And the thought was, you know, take back your data, and nobody cared, right? Because it's like, as an individual, our individual clickstream is not worth that much. It was only the media companies at the scale that they have that could really do something with it. What's interesting now, and I think somehow it's breaking, right, is that the existing infrastructure of advertising on the internet is based on pages. It's based on the content and the context of a page. It's not based on people. So Google, to your point, they know what people are searching for, but they don't know who's searching for what, really. And they know it, but they're actually not supposed to know it. They have a toolbar everywhere, but they can't touch that data because then it would get taken away from them by the government. So the shift is, and this is what we do at social media, is, you know, building an ad system or building ad technologies that are based on identity, are based on social interactions, not based on the content of a page. And what happens when you do that and when you go there is I do think you get the beginning of real explicit involvement on behalf of the consumer in the ads that they and their communities are consuming. Because I am logged into Facebook and it knows who I am, and I absolutely want to see the fantastic Mr. Fox, I know that when when I watch the preview and I hit yes, I'm going to go see that this weekend, on some explicit conscious level, I know that my friends are going to see that. I know that somehow somebody along the way is making money from the studio that's getting to me that way, and I'm okay with that. And that's very different than me being cookied, retargeted, etc. that's happening across the open, non-identified web. So we're going to see sort of, I think, the break of the targeting world and the beginning of the sort of the social advertising world. But it's going to be in fits and starts because, as Dick says, you know, you can't have people getting paid to promote products without people knowing about it. And there's going to be a whole bunch of best practices and policies that have to be put in place.
Cool, thanks. I'll just ask one final question, and then we'll open it up to the floor for others. Well, since you brought up... Oh, is it, do we have till 4:30? Are we done?
Till 4:10, and then open to questions.
Oh,
Till 4:30.
okay, great. So just a 4:10, right. So since you brought up Fantastic Mr. Fox, and you opened up, Laura, saying that you could tell people by what TV shows they used to watch. You could sort of assess them. I wanted to ask the panel, anyone who wanted to respond, about your relationship to entertainment industries in general. There's been a lot of, I actually was just down in Southern California a couple of weeks ago with a bunch of Berkeley, where there were a bunch of Berkeley alums in the entertainment industry, and they had a different dress code and a very different sort of way of presenting, and a lot of the discourse there was concern about what's happening in Northern California and its effects on Southern California, and both in terms of the way that TiVo presents us from doing ads on television, all the way to certain discussions about celebrity culture and its relationship to Twitter, et cetera. So I wonder what your thinking is about, say, whether it's the business model around the entertainment industry, about what it means to hold, capture, own, or disseminate open source content in the entertainment industries. Do you find yourself working around any of those issues?
Well, I just want to say, I sort of see it as California's personal civil war.
Yeah.
Of the content makers down here who are trying to protect their content, and you have people up here who are creating technology that often seems to be at odds with that. And the Supreme Court case, the Grokster case, it was like between Northern and Southern California.
Yeah, right.
And I think it is, a major issue. I was talking to, did an interview with George Lucas, and he said, if this sort of piracy goes on, you won't be able to make the kind of movies I made because you won't be able to afford it. And so, on the other hand, the tools to make things are becoming cheaper and cheaper. So I guess it does raise a lot of questions, or at least a lot of questions I hear in the entertainment industry about how they're going to, in fact, keep something that's professionalized, and support their content in some way, given the direction that things are going.
I mean, I think in this debate, I'm fairly squarely in the Northern Californian camp. And that's not per se support for piracy, other kind of things, but I think that being populist and disruptive is actually the dynamics by which the future comes about. Now, that being said, one thing I think is actually kind of interesting that tends to be overblown in this discussion is, just look at reality television, right? Like the whole it's this new technology thing that is completely disrupting our economic base and so forth. Look, it ultimately comes down to, as long as, you have some kind of protections, and I think those are, good or whatever, on piracy and be able to sell content. It's like, well, if you think the content's, worth producing a, actually I won't use that number because an X $100 million movie about, because people will pay for it, but then that's just a business decision. I think one of the things that I think is a shock is that, and this is one of the reasons I thought the whole social media and everything else, and everything from Facebook and Twitter to a lot of other things constitute deep entertainment streams, is because people find people entertaining, right? And as much as it's really cool to have this big glossy movie, is it like if I had to pay $50 for it versus the 50 cents for watching, reality television, would people pay $50 rather than 50 cents? And I think that there's some really substantive questions to really ask there about, what are the sacred cows?
Yeah, I guess I just want to say something about quality, though, and I mean, what's happened to certain other art forms over time that have gotten too expensive for people, so opera or theater and all these things, and fewer people see them. I don't know. I want to believe that there will be a way to support some kind of high quality art. I mean, I think that it's hard to make great music, for example. I mean, that's an industry that's, while I'm not, defending the record companies, but the question is, how will musicians make money. I think there's a role for being a professional musician, somebody who spends hours and hours and hours a day, but you have to be able to make a living. So I sort of see both sides of this, and I don't know yet what the model is going to be. I mean, you're seeing, for example, individual musicians who have figured out ways to make a living. Somebody like Zoe Keating, who is this wonderful journalist who left her software job and has over 1 million followers on Twitter. And she doesn't have a record company. She's doing it herself, you know. But it's
Yeah, Mike, just to, I guess my only other comment to add on what you just said there was, there are these examples of, well, you know, people, you know, I'll take the Southern California side of the debate just to play devil's advocate for the moment. Don't look at me like that. I'm trying to.
You're spending too much time with the studio execs, my friend.
Yeah, I was once over down there.
You're the
You know, I mean,
Terry
people-
Semel of Web 2.
You're doing really well on this,
Easy.
producing the list.
Easy. There's this notion that people in the industry up here like to put forth, which is well, here's you know, you just need to find an innovative way to remake your business. You know, here's an example of a woman who's done it, but you know, then there are these millions of other artists out there who, you know, okay, well, how many cellists are there with 1 million followers on Twitter who can figure out how to use YouTube and do X, Y, Z? That's not really what she should be worrying more about playing the cello, and probably the other cellists are. And so she shouldn't have to go figure out these 90 other things and be an expert in them. There's got to be some model that you know, encourages the arts and doesn't force you to be 10 other things at the same time.
Okay.
So I guess I'm definitely in Northern California. I'm a New Yorker, East Coaster, so I don't know what that puts me, but I live in Northern California now. So I think there's been sort of a logical flaw in the media industry for years and years and years, which is the assumption that in order to have high engagement, which is what everybody wants, you need to have high bandwidth and high resolution. So if you think about from books to radio to TV to cable to HD, Xbox 360 and homepage 3D TV and homepage takeovers, the assumption has been you need more bits, you need more resolution, you need more audio, video, multimedia to capture someone's attention. And I think what's happened, and somehow we've confused that, well, you need that kind of resolution, that kind of bandwidth to be quality. And that's what Hollywood does great, is they do Avatar at sort of incredible quality. What we're finding in terms of, why is it that Twitter is now, that Facebook is now responsible for 1/4 of all attention on the internet, and the growth of Twitter and the growth of things like Foursquare is, you actually pay attention, Facebook is just status updates, and there's just a little box like this. And yeah, there's some video attached sometimes and some images attached, but they're really, really small, low bandwidth communications. The same thing with Twitter with 140 characters, or Foursquare, which just I hit a button and I've expressed myself. And so that, to me, is what this is all about, and the extent to which Southern California can somehow embrace the fact that it's not about necessarily. I mean, I think reality TV and reality whatever is kind of clearly moving in that direction. It's not about the production quality and the gloss. It's really about.
But you can't just say to the lyric opera, well, you just haven't embraced technology. I mean, at some point you're trying to put on an opera.
Well, they should go into the street.
Sure, you can go see it, right? Yeah.
Okay, let's open it up. Yeah, back there.
Just feeding off what people have been talking about here, just quick thoughts on Comcast, because the panel's been speaking in terms of Northern California, Southern California, tech content split as if it's an either or. Well, Comcast is both, so how do you respond to that?
about to be both, right? Not both yet, about to be, right?
We're trying to.
And you talking about NBC and Comcast coming together?
Sure. The Comcast to me is, when I go to my basement and I have to reboot the router, they just have more and more of the blinking lights are turned on, which is, it used to just be internet, now it's telephone, it's going to be TV, and it's going to be, my premium subscriptions on my cable and the movies, and so they are like Cisco, I think, for the media world, right? They're plumbing. They're obviously important, but I don't think that Comcast is going to invent a lot. I think that they're going to enable a lot of other people to invent on top of that platform.
But, people I know, I was just talking to somebody in Washington who said that the Comcast NBC thing was the best argument she'd seen yet for network neutrality, which if people are sort of familiar with that, I'm assuming in this audience, not allowing the person who owns the pipe to favor some content over other content.
Yeah. The society is better off the more open platforms it can have. And that wasn't a shill for Twitter, but.
Another question? Yeah.
Over 50% of the world has never made a phone call. And I think it puts things in perspective of all of the things that you do very well. What are the things that you can do to contribute to the social welfare of our communities in a way in which we have to deal with places in other parts of the world that don't have access to social networks? And they have mobile devices, and how can we reach out in a simple way to change that?
Well, I mean, part of how a lot of entrepreneurs just look at mobile devices as another terminal, right? So you can also get people into the cloud. And one of the things I think is interesting is I've had a bunch of conversations with folks about how the whole kind of crowdsourcing, set of applications, everything from Mechanical Turk to a variety of other things, actually is creating interesting distributed economic things once you have that kind of connectivity. So like, for example, you have refugee camps which happen to have a computer center in them. Actually, in fact, the average, kind of hourly wage by working really hard you can get out of Mechanical Turk, if you know how to do it, is about $250. But $250 in some areas of the world is actually, is valuable. Now, to amortize the computer equipment and understand the network connectivity, and without getting, at the minimum, mobile connectivity, usually we don't have much to offer there because we build it out in the cloud, but the hope is that that connectivity naturally continues to expand.
Any other responses? Yeah.
I was just going to say, yeah, it's also spreading so fast. I mean, I did some reporting out of India and China where the mobile phones, I mean, that is their computer, really, and they're just becoming more and more accessible. And in many ways, it seems to me, outside of the United States, they've leaped over us in terms of wireless expansion. So you'll see like farmers in fields with a cell phone figuring out rice prices, with a mobile device, and I think it's happening. I think that there's also in other countries more involvement of the government sometimes than there has been in ours in developing connections. South Korea, certainly in China, it's kind of mixed, but that's just what I'm seeing, from my personal experience.
Yeah. You, in the middle there.
Hi, I run the digital practice at a public interest communications firm. So every day, somebody comes to me and says, how should we use social media for our cause? How should we use it to organize? What should we do? Some of them, like Move On, have really become content producers, so they have a different capacity than most causes. But I'd love to know what you guys think in terms of how causes should be using social media more effectively to organize and achieve whatever it is they're looking to do.
Okay. I mean, the answer is yes, right? So, I think
I thought your answer was going to be more sophisticated, or I wouldn't have deferred. You're coming at me, so I had to.
Okay. So there's no. There's so many different venues, and you obviously need a Facebook fan page, and you need a Twitter account, and you need communities, and you need a blog, and and you need some kind of CRM system to manage all of it, and you need email communications, and you probably need an agency to donate their time to help thread it all together.
Those are the tools.
Yep.
Definitely, help them put those tools into place. But I guess my question is more about what can engage. There's a social currency around cause.
Yeah, I think
sure.
one of the so my perspective on that is that simple facts, go a long way toward engaging people, and that those things tend to get rebroadcast and re-echoed and, et cetera. More so than, here's our perspective on this broader thing. These sometimes just simple facts that like the comment that was just made. 50% of the people in the world, adults in the world have never made a phone call, or whatever the statistic is. Those resonate with people and they get rebroadcast, right? And so to the extent that your cause has, I'm sure, a wealth of facts at its fingertips that it probably believes people would find shocking, just broadcasting those facts can be compelling.
Facts and actions. I mean, I think to Dick's point, it's not about waiting 3 months to finish the white paper and then send it out as a press release, right? It's about having a real person every single day just sharing something in all these different streams and having that consistency and that continuity of very, very short format, low bandwidth, information, as opposed to waiting for the great website redesign or waiting for the glossy mailer that you're going to send out at Christmas to raise money. And I think there are also, with causes, the actual application on Facebook, and with it's a lot of great. I'm happy to follow up. A lot of great, interesting startup technologies and services doing interesting things around cause-related social marketing that you could kind of leverage into and use as a platform.
I think one of the key things is people tend to feel like, oh, well, I put up a Facebook page or a Twitter ID and okay, there. And it's like, it's a strategy of how you use it, right? And so and which platforms you invest in, all platforms I think have natural gravity to where they're going. And you can see, like, one is about kind of real-time data and communication, one is about kind of lightweight social interaction, which includes pictures and games and so forth. And then what are the ways that you can leverage that gravity in its direction for the strategy of what you're doing? And the frequent thing is people go, oh, I've now set up an X, okay, means nothing.
Yeah, I mean, since, actually at NPR we've talked about how to use social media in order to help raise support for us, and people have talked about, getting people who already are big fans to kind of spread the word, and using your fans, using the people who are out there who support what you're doing, and getting them to send a link to their friends. And, I think there's actually great ways to use social media for causes.
Right. And, yeah, over there.
Can you talk about or share some observations about what social media has done during the Great Recession? What's happened to revenue models in terms of advertising? Particularly, I'm interested in hearing about LinkedIn. Have people been? I've noticed, my LinkedIn traffic has been kind of increased in the last year with people kind of using it more, for example, to find jobs or whatnot.
Great. That was, something I wanted to ask you.
I've been working with a game company on Facebook, and we've seen a surge of people, 250,000 people a month surge to play farm game, in Farmville in Zynga.
It seems to relate to your opening comments, to read the comments about people becoming sort of new sort of their own businesses as well. But I don't know if you have.
So a couple different threads. So I actually haven't been able to identify how the economic troubles have really, whether or not they've increased the LinkedIn adoption utility rate. Every quarter is a new record, and it's been that way since the history of the company. We launched May 5th, 2003. So the quarter did tick up, but it was unclear how much it ticked up because of economic circumstances. In terms of the ad side of our business, it had a quieting effect in Q1 and then otherwise just kind of washed out. And I think that part of what happens in these digital businesses is very low cost of serving. It's kind of a network of how people participate. We're kind of already, all these businesses are already more efficiently priced, and I've seen this everything from, I'm on the Zynga board, people play these games a lot and so forth, but it's, could you say, well, they're playing the games a lot because they don't have something else to do, or they're playing the games a lot because they enjoy playing games. It's very hard to sort that out. And I think that generally speaking, in terms of the online ad model, I think that the spend in online advertising continues to really go up because there's a whole bunch of attention there. the key question about the health of the businesses, and this is more of an investor perspective, because LinkedIn, actually, like I said, has basically, from now, it looks like there was no substantial impact from the economic troubles, is that basically all of every ad model I see is doing actually kind of just fine, but the principal challenge to move the dollars online is how large the denominator is. So much time and attention is going into online. The challenge is when you try to offer a high value product, the contrast between what people can buy for something that's tiny here kind of puts a floor on what the pricing you can ultimately do in terms of a high value product. And that's, I think, it's not really a recession comment as much as it's a how does advertising work in the new media comment. So.
Yeah.
iPhone apps then, is that kind of related to that, the compression of prices? A lot of them have been forced to go to 99 cents and $1.99.
Well, I think part of the problem with iPhone apps is you buy it in advance. So, like one of the things I think is a really good, sustainable model that works in all kinds of different ways is the freemium model. And it's part of what powers the virtual goods businesses and things like Zynga. And the problem is when you say, I think partially is I don't think that they were really focused on how this whole app economy worked, but a freemium economy is a much better economy than a before you know what you get, pay me. Right? It's not as good a model, right? So.
Yeah.
So I wanted to return to this morning's discussion around identity. And one of the things Jimmy Wales said at the time that I found kind of surprising that was anonymity is not a threat to Wikipedia. And we also have a tradition of anonymous political speech being protected in the country. And I think Dick said, the lack of anonymity was an important part to improving. So I'll ask you guys for your comments on that.
No, that's good. I'm glad you brought that up. So I think my perspective is that there's less anonymity in future forums, and that can be a good thing, like in the YouTube sense, because you lose all the junk that no one would. Well, I'm not going to say that if everyone knows it's me, because it's an asinine thing to say. But of course, one of the counter implication is, it's easier to find out who said that thing, and there are more authoritarian governments than ours in the world, and it's easier for those people to find out who said that thing. So there are mechanisms that the crowd has to deal with that, like they did in Iran. But let's be frank. I mean, it's going to be easier and easier for authority figures to discover who said that thing against us, right? Who said that thing against the company? Who was the whistleblower on the company? Who said that thing about the government? Who said that thing about the king, right? So I think it's a problem, and I don't know. I frankly don't know what the answer is to it. I don't like the idea of, well, don't worry, because someone will come along and there'll be a company that sort of jumps into the gap there and says, I'll protect your identity, I'll protect your anonymity, because then, of course, they have, all the balls, and they can do whatever they want with it, and they're the new authority figure. So I don't know what the right answer is there. I wish there was some way of thinking about an interesting bottom-up answer to that.
I had an interesting meeting a couple months ago with Witness, and it was really interesting because, I love the fundamental model, which is distributed video cameras in order to get atrocities on screen in order to essentially bring human rights issues and reactions to them front and center. They're actually now dealing with precisely this issue, because the problem is so many people have video cameras and everything else that it's actually becoming a mechanism by which a hostile government with bad intent can track people down and do stuff about it. And they're trying to balance they're trying to figure out how to navigate their mission. And I think it's important for good societies to have a venue by which anonymous communication can happen. And it's important that it's there, because if there is like a bad oppression, that can give a place where it can organize. Now, when things are working generally pretty well and there's mostly freedom of speech, the problem is most anonymous communication is terrible, right? So, I think my angle of this is like if someone said, look, we're going to make sure that we create an anonymous place where there can be anonymous discussion,
I'd be very supportive of that.
Yeah.
I think most people are going to ignore it except when they have a great need to it.
Right. There needs to be transparency around anonymity, because otherwise transparency and anonymity are sort of in conflict.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes there's too much anonymity online. I mean,
Right.
I know that a lot of my journalist friends have just sort of stopped reading some of the comments about their articles and things because they're so nasty
Yeah.
so often. And you know, people can say it anonymously, yet at the same time, it would be nice also to have a place where you know, I mean, there are the sort of wider privacy implications. And
Yeah.
The short question is, how is video going to rock this world? Like, what? That's the question.
Well, I'm in radio. But actually, I mean, interestingly enough, I just spent 5 weeks in Washington doing multimedia training that was supported by the Knight Foundation. And I was taught how to do video slideshows, although we are now told that really people just want a picture online and text, and that's what people do online. You know, video remains still quite an expensive proposition, and it's something I think that people will only do when they're sitting someplace where they feel they can safely watch something. You know, so I don't know how much video is gonna. It's already rocking things in terms of everybody's got a camera, everybody can put something up, but it doesn't mean it's any good. And I know that, you know, you'll be able to watch all that video on your TV and pick from as much bad video as you want.
Yeah, a final question?
It's sort of a response to that. What about the fact that there'll be potentially millions of these capturing video around the world in real time? Does that affect the news business? Does it affect how we come to know what's going on in the world? Not the SoCal version of video, but next to the NorCal version.
I think, I actually, you know, this is an issue that really I'm very interested in part because even though you have that video camera, I mean, anybody who knows anything about visuals, you know, it is in the perspective. You know, just because you have it on video doesn't mean it's the truth. There's a lot of complexity in that. And, you know, the future of the role of professional news organizations, I mean, this is a long conversation, but credibility, that's a biggie, and I don't think it changes with these cameras. It certainly allows people to go and capture a lot of stuff, you know, maybe a local policeman doing something abusive, and this is great. Yet I still think it's important that we have some role for somebody who looks at things and makes a determination whether the source is credible, even when it is a camera, because cameras can lie too.
It will mean that the future of media is necessarily radically open because, you know, there will be, even if there's a guy filming a video of a thing to try to make it have his perspective, there might be a woman behind that guy taking a video of him showing that it's set up, right? I mean, so there's going to be this radically open future of media that will mean it's not just 10 or 20 or 100 media organizations that decide this is the objective news story that I'm reporting objectively, but it will be, here are 9 different variations on looking at this, and you can think about them however you want. That's interesting. I don't know what the implications are for that. You disagree with that?
Well, I know, it's not that I disagree, it's a really complex, it's just such a complex question, and I think that, you know, there is so much information online, and credibility, I think, eventually, at some point, we're going to reach this point where people, I hope, are going to say, you know what, we need some institutions that we trust, and I think more than ever, if a news organization is going to survive, they're going to have credibility. Real credibility, that people really trust them in a whole new way. And I don't know, this is a longer discussion, and I don't have enough time right now, but it's an interesting question.
Oh, one more? Okay, I can take one more, yeah. Yes, in the back. Is there a microphone in the back? Just, we'll have to project, I'm sorry.
Here it comes,
Here it comes.
Here it comes.
Well, I find it very interesting, this battle between transparency, anonymity, and privacy, and also the concept of bottom-up. I think they all seem to be coming together. I can see the battle is basically that in a completely permissive and accepting society, that everybody can be honest and transparent, and there is no need for anonymity. Because whatever you do, whatever you believe, or whatever you is completely acceptable because it's open society and it's a bottom-up democracy that people, the wisdom of the crowd essentially dictates. But in the process of getting there, there is all this clamor about protecting your identity and protecting your privacy and so forth, so that until we get to a situation where hopefully globally there is no need for hiding any place, because you're just being yourself and you're honest, and there is no need for anonymity. The bottom-up news thing, I want to bring your attention to a site that I've seen called Dotspot, that people can attach videos and comments on any news on the internet, and so there would be a multiplicity of opinion and ideas and things that they have observed and so forth. So I would like to ask you, what is your vision of the future in terms of societies that are completely accepting of their individual differences? And
a rousing last phrase.
Yeah. Well, I think the notion of bottom-up, which I think we throw out there, it presupposes that the local actors have some degree of control, right? So if all these individuals are in control of themselves, then you have something that comes out of that. And the reality is, as we've discussed, you have control of your actions, but you don't actually have control of the information that the actions produce, because everybody around you is tweeting and taking pictures and videotaping you and plugging you into different databases that you're not aware of. So I don't think from an identity and an anonymity and a privacy perspective that there will be a bottom-up revolution that will make everything happy and progressive. I think we're going to have, no sooner are we going to have to, regulate Google than we're going to have to regulate Facebook, because they've amassed so much data about individuals that the individuals can no longer control at their own kind of individual local actor level. I think it's feckless to think that there's going to be bottom-up regulation based on the architecture of data.
That's a decision that those companies make about the access to that data and whether it's accessible or not. That's not a de facto.
I didn't mention Twitter because I think Twitter is at least until you got involved, was very open and very progressive, and wasn't doing things with the API to create competitive advantage. So
very good.
Okay, with that aside, let's thank our panelists for their contributions.
Thank you.
I'd say so.
Thank you so much to Shannon and our panel, and we're going to take a 10-minute break and come back for our final panel of the day at about 10 till 5. Thank you.
All right.
I'm going to go to Solve. Belly. Great.